There has been little cause for hope since Hamas unleashed terror on Israeli soil and in the furious retaliation which has followed. Tonight, though, came a small glimmer of light in the dark. 2 Americans held hostage by Hamas for 14 days, a mother and daughter from Chicago, have been set free, the first tangible sign of progress since US President Biden returned from his mission to the Middle East. He said he was overjoyed their ordeal was over. For 201 others, though, it is not. They remain captive, their fate unknown, and there are few grounds for optimism for more than 2 million civilians under siege in Gaza. Visits by Rishi Sunak to Egypt and the UN chiefs to Egypt's border with Gaza have yet to result in any aid flowing across at all. Whether it will and whether more hostages will be released before a potential Israeli ground invasion remains the focus of intense diplomacy.
After 14 dark days, a glimmer of light. Judith Raanan and her daughter Natalie are now free. Hamas say they were released for humanitarian reasons. Mrs. Raanan is said to be unwell. The mother and daughter live in Illinois, but were kidnapped while holidaying in one of the southern Israel kibbutzes so savagely attacked by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th.
We expect a team from the U.S. Embassy to see them very shortly. Over the coming hours, they'll receive any support and assistance that they need. And of course, we're very anxious to be able to reunite them with their loved ones.
The hostage crisis was no doubt high on the agenda when Mr. Blinken met Qatari leaders last week. And the releases are a coup for Qatar, which has influence over Hamas because the Gulf nation provides much of the money on which the Gaza economy depends. This photo shows Mrs. Raanan and Natalie just after they made it back into Israel this evening. They're lucky, not least because nobody or nothing else got in or out of Gaza today, because the only feasible humanitarian access point, the Rafah crossing from Egypt, has stayed shut, an impediment to the aid so badly needed on the Strip. 20 lorries are waiting to go through, but the gate remains closed because Egypt wants to give this war a wide berth, and Israel wants assurances the aid won't be confiscated by Hamas. This morning, as he arrived at the crossing point, the UN Secretary-General drove into a crowd of Egyptians sympathetic to the plight of the people of Gaza. Mr. Guterres hopes he can find the key to unlock the gate behind him.
Behind these walls, we have 2 million people that is suffering enormously, that has no water, no food, no medicine.
The majority of those 2 million are now crammed into the southern part of Gaza. Half of them were bombed out or voluntarily chose to evacuate the northern part. They are the most in need of help. We have no electricity or internet, said this woman. We can't even ring our family or friends. We're suffering very much. Over the last 24 hours, the buildings damaged in Israel's incessant aerial bombardment include the oldest functioning church in Gaza. Health authorities on the Strip claim more than a dozen people were killed when a wall collapsed. Israel says the Greek Orthodox Church was not an intended target. Gazans have been hoping that along with schools and hospitals, places of worship provide a safe haven. But it seems those trying to evade this war don't really have a prayer. Before news of the hostage releases came out, Israel's defense minister said today that his country's ultimate war aim is, and I quote, the removal of Israel's responsibility for life in Gaza and the establishment of a new security reality. That suggests Israel wants to wash its hands of the Gaza Strip and put in a wide buffer zone to keep it that way. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
Well, in a moment, we'll get the latest from John Ray in Israel. But first, let's cross to Dan in Washington. Dan, you were at that briefing by the Secretary of State a little earlier. President Biden said he was overjoyed at the news of the release of the hostages, but a very sombre address, really, from Antony Blinken. How hopeful do you think he sounded about potential further releases?
Well, look, he's being cautious, Julie. He said that he was working relentlessly to try and get the other hostages free. He talked about the relief that he felt on getting this mother and daughter out, but you could just tell how personally invested he is in all this, having spent a week in the Middle East. But he did also mention, look, that there are 10 other American hostages still being held and more than 200 other hostages, including up to 10 Britons. He spoke about the agony that the families of those people will be feeling with every passing day. We heard from President Biden today in a statement who talked about being overjoyed and how they were working around the clock to try and free the other hostages. We also heard from Hamas today, who said that they had released this mother and daughter for humanitarian reasons and, quote, to prove to the American people claims by Biden and his fascist administration are false and baseless. When Tony Blinken was asked today whether, what he made of Hamas's claim that if Israel stopped the bombing, they would release more hostages, he said, quote, I wouldn't take anything Hamas says at face value. You wouldn't with ISIS.
OK, Dan, thank you for that. A good point to pick up with John, who's in Tel Aviv tonight. Good evening to you, John. What impact, if any, might this news tonight have on Israel's plans for that ground offensive?
Well, it is the first good news we've had to report in 2 bleak weeks, Julie, even if the hows and the whys of this remain very obscure indeed. It may be a coincidence that those aid convoys will begin to roll within the next couple of days, we now think. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that the Israelis were saying no aid in unless the hostages come out. It may well be true, as has been widely reported tonight, that Israel is under a lot of pressure from its Western allies. That's America, of course, principally, to delay the land incursion to allow these talks time to work. That would certainly suit Hamas to keep dragging things out. What is for sure, though, is that it proves that diplomacy works. A statement from the Qataris tonight, which adds a little bit more optimism into this. They say that we hope these efforts will continue and that they will result in the release of all civilian hostages of every nationality. Now, tonight, in their regular military briefing, the Israelis were stressing that their preparations for what they call the next phase of their war goes ahead. But we know from experience that nobody, let alone Hamas, does something for nothing.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you.